here you are. We're speaking to you on your last day,
Right.
officially in the office. Tomorrow doors will be closed that you could normally walk into. What are you feeling? What are your thoughts here after 12 years?
Well, I think there's going to be a real absence for sure. I mean, I still have my friends that I'll keep in touch with every day like I always have, and we can continue to discuss issues and things like that. But it won't be the same as having the boots on the ground, if you will, to being right there and having the bully pulpit, that any day you could give a speech on the floor
Right.
and get a message out and things like that. So that won't be there. But, there's a time for everything. And for me, I never dreamed that I would be doing this at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started, I thought, man, maybe 3 or 4 terms. It ended up 6 because I kept getting more responsibility and things that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Then my kids hit school age, and it's time to be at home.
Time to be a family man.
Yeah.
To a certain degree. We're not. This isn't the last we're going to hear of Brad Wenstrup, though.
Well, I hope not. I mean, I hope we can do some good things locally, nationally, and maybe even internationally, because I've had some pretty good experiences during my time in Congress.
Sure.
I started out on armed services appropriately as a soldier, an Iraq War veteran, and then I was also chairing VA Health. We got the Mission Act done. So we have some accomplishments we're very proud of. And then we lost 2 Ohioans and 2 doctors on Ways and Means Committee, so people were like, Brad, you got to do that. And that's a good committee. I could work on a lot of things, tax, trade, and we got the USMCA done, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. That was a real accomplishment, as well as things like the Secure Act. And we got some changes within health that I'm proud of that we worked on. And being able to be there and represent patients. I was in private practice 27 years here in Cincinnati. So everything has kind of fallen into place, and I had a good military career that I can't complain about.
And let's talk about you. So you joined the reserves in 1998, rank of colonel in 2017. You've now retired from the reserves. Put that behind you. How did you decide that, all right, I'm going to now go into politics? I know in 2009 you ran for the mayoral race in Cincinnati. You didn't win that. That clearly didn't discourage you from going into politics. What was it that you said, hey, I think I want to go into politics even after the military, after serving even in the community with your profession?
Yeah, so I joined the reserves in '98 because we kept getting attacked, and I remember seeing a couple local doctors being called up during the Gulf War, and I always thought I would do that. And I wasn't getting any younger, so I called 1-800-USA Army, signed up. I go to Iraq for a year. I come back to Cincinnati. We don't have a base or a post here.
Right.
I was kind of the face of the war for a lot of people when I came home, and I started being asked to speak a lot of places. And people started saying, you ought to run for office. And so I started getting involved with the Hamilton County Republican Party, just saying, put me on policy committee or something, right? But I looked at Washington and I thought, we got people making business decisions that never ran a business. We got people making health decisions that never saw a patient, and people making military decisions that never served. And I think our founders had in mind that you bring something forward when you serve in office. And so those thoughts were in my mind, and I had people saying, you ought to run. And I got talked into running for mayor. And really for me, I thought, what do I have to lose? And I'll meet a lot of people in the city that I love. And so let's go for it.
Right.
And Mark Mallory beat me, but he heard what I had to say about health. And a couple months later, he called me. He said, can you send me your resume? Because we got an opening on Board of Health, and I want to consider you. And I did that for 3 years before going to Congress. Another good experience before going to Congress.
I was going to say, just even going through the motions of an election, which people that have never been in that realm don't fully understand it. They see it on the outside as a voter. You don't understand the whirlwind that's inside that. So that first experience, was there a bug that sparked? You said, I kind of like this environment, getting out and shaking hands and getting out and talking about issues.
Well, I did like that part of it, but it can be frantic, because a lot of people want to turn it into, a battle, and it is a battle of sorts, but it doesn't have to be an uncivil battle. And so I did kind of like it, and I thought, I still think I could do more, and so now I serve on Board of Health. I became a residency director at Christ Hospital. Something else that the government deals with is postgraduate medicine. I thought I got even more experience to bring to Washington. Yeah. And I thought, go for it. If you don't get it, you haven't lost anything. You still go back to your practice. And then when I won, the military, because I'm still in the reserves, the military came and said, well, we want to assign you to Walter Reed, which is a great honor in and of itself for me in the military. Mm-hmm. And then when I made colonel, they say you have to do some administrative work, and I landed a job as a medical policy advisor for the Chief of the Army Reserve. Both of these, that was at Fort Belvoir, both in the Beltway. Mm-hmm. And the last time I was called in was when we left Afghanistan, and the Chief of Orthopedics said, are you in town? Because we have more wounded coming in tonight, and we could use your help tomorrow. And what an honor. Yeah. I mean, you know, what an honor to be able to be in this position, serve in Congress, do that. And, you know, but at the end of the day, it's God, family, country in that order for me. And the family was like, Dad, we need you home. We need you home. Because we used to go back and forth, and we had a place in D.C., but not once they hit school age.
Yeah, it does change things.
Yes.
It does change things for sure. You did accomplish a number of things, obviously, veteran-related while you were in. One of those also the VA Prescription Data Accountability Act. That was in 2017. Mm-hmm. The opioid crisis obviously hit our community here very hard, your district as well. And when you talk about our veterans who are literally, in the stories that I've done, veterans just being handed pills, here, this will take care of your PTSD, mm-hmm. and next thing you know, they're hooked on pain medications. That wasn't the solution. That was one of the focuses here, to make sure veterans from a prescription standpoint were being taken care of as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the fentanyl and opioid problem is huge in America still today, and it was really big. And Southern Ohio was ground zero for so much of this that, of course, we took a strong interest. You know, and as a doctor too, doctors were basically overprescribing. They were told you must get rid of their pain. I never bought into that. I was always frugal with pain medications. I don't think I turned anyone into addiction because I thought there was other ways to manage pain. But, you know, that being said, those things were very passionate for me to engage in. And I hope to still engage in them because it's a real threat to our country. It's a cancer on our society today. Yeah. And so we have to attack it from every angle. I've always said that the problem we have with drugs goes from the border to ultimately to work, you know, because once someone's addicted, you may get them out of it. They don't have somewhere to go. Mm-hmm. We've got to do a lot of things to solve that problem. So these are threats to the country that I was glad to embrace that maybe people didn't always see as they think of, say, a bombing or something like that.
Right. And over that 12 years, there were a number of different things that you were able to touch and help veterans in the military with. To make sure that they receive the hand up that they deserve when they take that uniform off.
Well, you know, it's interesting, as a member of Congress, you represent your constituents when they're having problems with a government agency. Sure. VA, IRS, it doesn't matter. Getting a passport, whatever. But a lot of times for our veterans, there would be things, hey, I'm not getting an answer. I should be having this. I got this disability. I'm not receiving that. So a lot of things there that our office, and I had great staff that were able to do that, and they really built relationships with the people at the VA, right, who became their go-to person, and we were able to help a lot of veterans in that regard. But I think the Mission Act to me was probably the biggest, and because it was able to affect so many people in their health for a benefit that they earned and that they were promised. And let's face it, there's a physician shortage all around the country. And so if you can't get the specialist you need, for example, at the VA, why not be able to go to the person right down the street? And, you know, I had a guy in Chillicothe in my first term, and this was one of my motivating factors too. He said, I'm 85, I have cataracts. They want me to drive to Dayton. And I'm 85 with cataracts. I shouldn't be driving to Dayton to get it fixed when there's a guy down the street. Yeah. And we were able to do that, and rightfully so. And actually, in many ways, it saves the VA money because they're not trying to necessarily prop up something just to serve a few people here and there. I mean, I look at that with, for example, neurosurgery. So our VA here have a robust neurosurgery department when UC has it right next door. Mm. You know, we can do smart things, but make sure that we're getting care for our veterans.
Yeah, community care has helped so many people. Obviously, June of 2017, a day that lives in your memory, I'm sure. Friendly game of baseball, congressional game, and kind of routine in a sense, like everyone looks forward to it. But that day turned to tragedy. Unfortunately, you were there. You jumped into action to help Scalise. And what do you take away now? I mean, I'm sure this many years later, that's still part of your journey over this 12 years.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, and Steve and I knew each other before, but we've really become very close friends. Yeah. You know, that day when I was recently out at the ball field, and I thought to myself, this is a place of miracles. Mm-hmm. That's what happened here this day, our series of miracles. Everything had to go right for us to survive. Steve Scalise was there. He took a bullet for all of us. Because he has a detail, he has police detail. They're undercover in a car. This guy doesn't know they're there. Yeah. And this guy started shooting over on the third base side, and I had changed my mind about going to the outfield, which I would have been right out there in left field. Mm-hmm. And went down to the batting cage, which was on the third base side and outside the 20-foot fence of the field. And so I was in probably the safest place I could be, but I credit really my experience and more. You know, who's doing the shooting, how many are doing the shooting, where's it coming from, right. Protect yourself, you can't help anybody if you're dead too. Mm-hmm. And then I could see the shooter, I could see the Capitol Police, I could see people diving into the dugout getting hurt because it served as a bunker. There's bullet holes above that. But that was our last practice, and for some reason that day I didn't have to leave early, and I'm normally gone by that time. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have pitchers and catchers in the bullpen, which is where he started shooting from. Just missed the third baseman. So all these things that just had to be right. And fortunately, by the time they were able to, after 136 rounds, if they were able to take this man down, I was able to get to Steve, and truthfully, my mind went completely to a soldier that we lost in Iraq. Mm-hmm. Because he was bleeding internally, and I recognized that was Steve's problem. He had an entry wound on the side, and when I examined him, he had no exit wound. So I knew it went up. I said, I need a belt. I'm going to stop the bleeding here, do everything I can to keep him still to stop any bleeding internally. Yeah. And then kept checking his pulses, and if they start going out, I got to find some way to get some more blood to his heart, lungs, and brain. Yeah. Where maybe you drain an arm and put blood in there. But you don't want to do it too soon because you can increase his blood pressure and he'd bleed more. So it's one of the things a surgeon taught me when I was a resident. He said, you know, anybody can be a great surgeon when everything goes right. What do you do when things don't? Right. And just like, you know, often in war, you don't have everything you necessarily need, you know. Vendors don't come to Abu Ghraib prison and bring you new surgical equipment all the time. So you do the best with what right. You got, and that was one of those things that day. But for that helicopter to land, if that hadn't happened, that was a helicopter that could fly anywhere in D.C., park police. Mm-hmm. If that didn't happen, I don't think he'd made it. Yeah. And so a lot of things had to go right. And when the medics came, I said, he needs to have an IV started. They said, we don't have that with us. Well, they didn't have a medic bag like medics do. Sure. Right? Yeah. So, but they had it on the ambulance. So they did get one going before he flew out to replenish his fluids, but I had him trying to drink as much as he could. So I think of that day from the medical side and how everything had to happen right, and it was a miracle that they did, and a miracle that Steve Scalise was there, because if he wasn't, this guy could walk in easily and kill 20 to 30 members of Congress and their staff, change the balance of power in the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. And I now have a bipartisan bill that would address that for the House, to where, and I hope it's taken up in the next term, to where you would name 5 people to take your place if you die or are killed, mm-hmm. and the governor picks one of them. You only serve until there's been a special election. And that way, we are always a full House in those situations, right? If someone retires, that's different. Yeah. That way, we always have a full House. So I'm looking at the continuation of government in times of crisis, and that event that day opened our eyes to that this could really happen. Sure. And we have to be very careful.
And you pushed to have that designated as domestic terrorism.
It's another long story in which an investigation is still going on with an inspector general as to why the FBI called that suicide by cop when the guy doesn't know there's cops there. He had our names and descriptions in his pocket. Yeah. You know, he hated Republicans and he was going to act on that. That's not suicide by cop, and it got changed to domestic violent extremism. We're still looking into who made the decision when no one else did. Alexandria police called it violent extremism. An assassination attempt, nobody was calling it suicide by cop. You want suicide by cop? Pull a gun on a cop.
Yeah.
It won't take long.
Right.
One shot, not 136.
That's true. Domestic terrorism has made a number of headlines over your 12 years. It appears to be growing. More concerns. As you leave the Hill, what is that discussion like up on the Hill?
That it is recognized as a significant problem, but it's how, why, and when, and what can we do to try and prevent it. You know, we give our Americans, rightfully so, a lot of freedoms, freedom of privacy, et cetera. You just can't start investigating every American or any person who's walking around in the country. Right. But at the same time, we have to have signals, and we have to have, hopefully, any neighbor, friends, people that see something that doesn't seem right, and report it. And I think that's going to be very important, that we are able to act before something bad happens. You know, we talk about school shootings, et cetera, and the debate in Congress always goes to the gun. And as someone who's been shot at, I can have that conversation, right? But I will say, until you look at the events in someone's life that leads to the thoughts and feelings that this is okay to do, and that I'm going to do something good today by doing this, we've got to address that. We have to look at the root causes of this mental behavior that takes place, and how and why does it happen. And we don't talk about that enough. I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. I don't have a PhD, but enough to say we have to look at the internal thoughts and feelings of people to understand why they got to that point to go out and commit these heinous acts.
Yeah. You served under 3 different presidents, of course, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Was there anything different looking back under the 3 administrations where, hey, this was an amazing positive, perhaps under, Biden and Obama, that maybe the general public didn't know? Maybe there's positives under President Trump. Looking back and reflecting on the 3 different administrations, because there's a lot of, I think, on the streets, and of course social media, which is a whole nother beast, there is a lot of this. Yeah. That Republicans hate Democrats, left and right, and there's all this fighting on both sides. What was it being on the Hill, working within the different administrations as you reflect back?
Well, I didn't go to Washington to hate anybody. I can say I'm getting close maybe with some, but I didn't go there to hate anybody. I always took that approach. And if you're someone that can't have a civil conversation, I just generally avoided you. There's no reason to go there. Sure. But I have friends on both sides of the aisle, because we can come up with things that are good for America and that serve all people. I would say, hey, what I'm trying to do here, this helps your constituents too, and here's how. So you have to be persuasive in your actions. You have to assess the battlefield, because it's one thing if your party has the House, Senate, and White House. It's different when you don't have the Senate, but you have the House, and that flips. So there's all these different dynamics that you're faced with under whatever administration. But how do you try to get things done? And so I always tried to work within those parameters of what the best opportunity would be. And so I was asked, I was with 2 other retiring members, a Democrat and another Republican, and it was a former CNN moderator. We were in front of American Hospital Association. And he said, well, what can we do? What can we do to try and reduce some of the chaos? And what I'm going to tell you, I mean sincerely. And it's not a reflection of where we're sitting today. Right. If the media paid more attention to those that actually got things done, that got things across the finish line, the behavior would change. The behavior would change. I remember in the 70s, it became a fad for people to run out on the baseball field, right? And the camera would follow them around. Well, when baseball decided we're no longer allowing you to show them, it stopped. So maybe if we really dug into the people that were in there doing the work, because I'll be frank, both sides of the aisle, we have people that come to perform and work. And then we have some that come to be performers. And you see them, people can see them every day on TV. But if you check, did they accomplish anything? Did they change anything? Did they do something the next generation's going to say thank you for? And that was always one of the things I would challenge people, is what we are about to do, does this make Americans more free? And will the next generation say thank you? Because that's what our founders were trying to instill, a free people that had their own government. It was a government of the people. And I think the script's been changed quite a bit over time. But we should get back to that line of thinking.
When you look at that script over 12 years, the Republican Party that you were a part of when you first joined Congress looks a little different today.
Yeah, both parties do.
Sure, both parties. I'm speaking specifically about Republicans because obviously that's your party. But looking at the Republican Party now compared to 12 years ago, did that weigh in at all into your decision to not run again?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
People would say, do you get tired of the chaos? I said, I've been to war. That's chaos. This isn't chaos. And, what do you do in a chaotic situation? You've got to stay calm. You've got to, drive on.
Have you had any conversations with some members of your party to say, hey, why don't we take the focus off this? Why don't you not be on that nightly, 24-hour news network or whatever, and why don't we sit down and have a meeting and talk about these issues? Have you pulled any of those individuals, without perhaps even naming names, have you pulled those individuals aside and said, hey, we have work to do?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It happens within our conference, when we're together and we have those confrontations or deliberations, if you will. But people are going to do what they want to do. I mean, people are saying, but you see how many hits I got? It's the same with media, right? They become their own media entity more than necessarily trying to. I mean,
concerned about the clicks and not their constituents.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one guy, he's no longer there. You might figure out who it is. I mean, he one time said, you guys write all legislation. He wore makeup all day and just looked for cameras. I mean, that... there are times to talk to the camera. I don't have a problem with that, right? It's how you get your message out to the people. And
last name wouldn't start with a G, would it?
Maybe.
But to that end, I think, and I can't remember the old proverb, but there's one that talks about basically all bad apples or whatever will eventually float away or drop to the bottom or what have you, that you hope that all the ones who are really doing the good work will eventually rise to the top. Everything else just kind of falls away, so that chaos eventually goes to the side and you can get real work done. We'll see what the next Congress and the Congress after that or whatever. There's still a lot of work that still needs to be done.
Oh, there is. But the Republicans do a little bit differently than the Democrats. The Democrats, you get your positions based on seniority, and they don't term limit it. Now, we might give a waiver once in a while, but we have a steering committee that decides who's the chairman of a committee. So it's voted on by your peers who gets to be chairman of the committee. And so that's a little bit different, and we put a term limit of 2 terms.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if you came in halfway through a term, or the conference feels like, hey, this is the best person and we need them right now in that committee, they might get a 3rd term. Right. That happens once in a while. So it's done a little bit differently. So you do hope that it's the ones that really come to work hard that rise to that level. But here's what I was seeing, especially in the last couple of years, is when you have a narrow margin like we have, what was happening within our conference all too often was people, rather than trying to sell their ideas and be persuasive and run them through committee, they would just go and say, you know what, Speaker? We're going to take down the vote. We're going to vote with the Democrats. Oh, you know what, Speaker? We're going to call for a motion to vacate if you don't put my bill on the floor, rather than your bill earning its way up the way it should be. And so that's a problem that needs to be solved. And I can tell you, I think, you've got Mike Johnson in that position now, Leader Hakeem Jeffries on the other side. If he's the next speaker, it won't be by a large majority, most likely, and he's going to be in the same boat within his party. So there's a real concern amongst the doers, I guess, in Congress about that.
When you were in office, and then Donald Trump announced his candidacy, and he planned to run for office. What was your first reaction? Here's a reality TV star, real estate mogul, what have you, had his history, and his name was known, obviously. When he announced his candidacy, what was your first reaction?
Well, he had interviews from years ago where he didn't rule that out.
Yeah.
He said things like, and maybe it was 20 years before, where, if I think I can make a difference and I should do it, then I'm going to do it. And the time came. There were a lot of people in that primary. I didn't know that he'd pull through that, but he did. Mm-hmm. And being in Congress at the time, I had the opportunity to be out with my constituents all the time. Mm-hmm. And I just saw people said, we want this different person.
And that, I think, was key. There was a different messaging, different. He wasn't the standard, no offense, the standard politician model, I guess, that was always used.
Well, I don't think I'm the standard either, but
no,
that's okay. but that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And look, very few people go immediately to run for president. He's a unique individual.
Sure.
In that regard. And he surprised a lot of people, and he won. He won even bigger this time, which is very interesting, compared to 2016.
But let's go back to his re-election campaign. You were one of 126 Republicans, though, that did support a lawsuit filed about the contesting the results of the 2020 presidential election.
Contesting what Pennsylvania did. Let's be clear.
Okay.
Let's be clear on that,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what got twisted in the media. You're saying, oh, you're not recognizing the results of the election. No, I signed on to the brief. And I'm glad you asked this question, because I signed to the amicus brief that said Pennsylvania violated the Constitution. The Constitution says the legislature will determine how the vote is run. In Pennsylvania, a judge said, we're going to let you vote for 3 more days. That's what I have a problem with. Mm-hmm. The legislature didn't do it. A judge did. That's against the Constitution. And so it went to the Supreme Court.
Right.
The Supreme Court said they made no ruling. A lot of media would say, well, the Supreme Court struck that down. No, they didn't. Mm-hmm. They just didn't rule on it at all. They said, well, before the election, no one's been harmed, and afterwards, it's moot. Well, it's not moot to a lot of people.
Right.
And at some point, they need to clarify that. But I think they felt, what happens if we do that now?
The chaos that surrounded that re-election and that election overall it continues. It harmed our democracy on both sides, and I think the thread through America's belief system of how can I trust the election process. And attorneys general across the country have done their due diligence to push out and say, listen, our machines aren't connected to the internet. Everything is counted, double counted, triple counted. Like, there has been a major campaign to reinforce to the American people that we have a perfect system. Maybe not perfect, but we have a system in place that is better than other countries around the world, and that when you vote, your vote counts.
Well, and I think in Ohio we do it very well.
Right.
No one complained in Ohio. No one complained whether they lost their election or won their election. Nobody said, I think something bad happened here. Right. And hats off to Columbus and the people at Secretary of State that we have a system in place like that here. Now, when it comes to certifying, I did certify because I believe in states' rights. Mm-hmm. And if states did something wrong, and this is what they send, that's on them. Constitutionally, our job is just to count what the states send. So you think, well, why do we have a chance to object? Mm-hmm. 1876. And I'll bet you 90% of Congress does not know this. I kept saying to my staff, we got to figure out why we're allowed to object to the numbers when the Constitution says just count them.
Right.
Because some states, 1876, sent 2 slates. Well, you had to pick one. You couldn't accept both slates. So they put a system in place that, if you can object. And actually, when Donald Trump won the first time, I saw Democrat after Democrat objecting all day. But you needed a senator to be part of it too for it actually to go to a vote. Well, they never got that. They did, previously Democrats did get that, I think about 20 years earlier, if I'm not mistaken. But our job is just to count the votes, right? The state, if something went wrong in the state, I can't control that. And so, therefore, I did sign on to the amicus brief, and therefore I certified the election with what they sent. But 1876, they sent two, you pick one, and House picks one, Senate picks another, and if they conflict, I think it's whatever the governor sent. So, I mean, that's going back a ways. I think you get rid of that.
Right.
I think you just get rid of that ability, because your only job by the Constitution is to count the votes.
January 6th, you and I spoke. Obviously, you were gracious enough to find time during the chaos there to speak with me. Looking back now, it's a mark in our history.
Yeah.
Fueled by everything from social media and conspiracies to you name it. What are your thoughts looking back on January 6th?
Well, just as I feel, I don't blame Bernie Sanders for the shooter at the baseball field. He's responsible for his own actions. The people that day were responsible for their own actions. You know, if you kick in a window at the Capitol, what do you think? You know, we're allowed to protest in this country. I love that. You don't get to do that. And so one thing led to another. From what I could see, I'm in my office watching it on TV, I see people strolling through the Capitol and police standing right there. So it was a bizarre situation all the way around. And I think we're finding more from investigations recently that the president asked for National Guard to be present. Nancy Pelosi said no. I mean, why would you not? So there's still a lot to be uncovered from the events of that day. But if people did wrong, they're responsible for their actions. But at the same time, America saw people burning federal buildings and things like that, and you didn't hear anything happening to them. So it's a rough time in America. And our government has a responsibility of being, our unelected, of being apolitical. Their job should be their job. Right is right and wrong is wrong. The law is the law. And carry it out. Interestingly, when the January 6th commission was being formed, bill was written, has to go through Rules Committee and be approved, but you can make amendments at Rules Committee. I went to Rules Committee and I said, if you're truly interested in protecting this beautiful Capitol and the people that work in it, because that was the premise. We're going to look at how we're postured so we can do better, right? That was the premise. I said, it'd be a good idea for the commission to also look at the events of June 14th, 2017, which I've gone over with you already today. Look at that too. I said, because the balance of power in the United States House of Representatives could be changed in one morning. I said, that's an insurrection. That's an insurrection. You talk about taking down the government. And so what happened was the chair at the time from the other party just looked at me and said, y'all had your chance. That's the response I got. That told me right there that that commission wasn't serious about just protecting us in the Capitol. And we're looking at that. And now, so in a similar role, I get asked to chair the select subcommittee on the pandemic.
Right.
I didn't mention political party one time, nor did my staff or any of our reports. Not one time.
And on that though, let's switch to COVID, because obviously it's the thing that nobody expected. It was on no one's radar necessarily that, hey, suddenly the world was going to shut down as part of this. And one of the last things that you've done as a member of Congress is to release this after action review in this report, which touches on everything from reform for the World Health Organization, the administration endorsing Taiwan's inclusion to replace China, faulting them for their actions and failures to cooperate, national stockpile management, manufacturing ready reserve components, wastewater monitoring. There's so many things in this. The pandemic itself was something in the modern age that we've never had to deal with.
Right.
And it caught so many off guard. And of course there was this huge response, a large blanket, if you will, of stand 10 feet away, stand 20 feet away, you have masks, wipe down your food deliveries from DoorDash or what have you. Do you think that since we hadn't experienced this, and clearly hadn't prepped properly, there was that initial response that had to happen? Didn't make everyone happy, but what was your thought on that initial surge and all of these precautions and measures that were put into place?
Yeah, I err on the side of caution, right? But as you know things,
Yeah.
let's be smarter, because we can't let all these other things be damaged and go by the wayside. Education, business, everything else.
Right.
We have to do our best to preserve the overall health of the country, not just your health concerning the virus. I mean, I had a guy, the sheriff called me, said I just had a guy commit suicide. He was scheduled for a painful hernia surgery the next day. He was in so much pain he took his life because they canceled it and didn't know when they were going to let him come have it done.
Mm-hmm.
All right? You know how many cases they had in that hospital at the time? 0. So a lot of things were not making sense. We make a lot of recommendations in there. Local flexibility, this and that. But you have to tell the American people, we're suggesting this because we don't know yet. And I was all for the 2 weeks shutdown. Why? Let's gather ourselves. Mm-hmm. You probably are less likely to get it if you stay in your home and this and that. But we have to have certain things that we continue to operate. Right. How can we do it the most safely as far as we know? But once we knew, things should have been more of guidelines rather than mandates, recommendations more than absolutes. We learned a lot who was making these decisions and why. Mm-hmm. The teachers union was suggesting and telling the CDC what they wanted, and never in their internal documents were they saying, we got to get the kids back in school, it's going to be important, and we got to get them caught up, how are we going to do that? Mm-hmm. They were saying things like, we need a trigger to close. So we want 10 feet. A lot of these things going on that we have discovered within our government, it's a problem. You talk about trust. And I've been working somewhat with General Friedrichs, MD, who's right now under the Biden administration running the White House pandemic response team. And we sat together. He came to our doctor's caucus. We had a lot of same ideas. Manufacturing reserve, some of the things you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Same ideas, and we got to get going on these things now. And we'll be a better country for it in a lot of ways. But he said, how do we regain trust? I said, get it out of the White House. Mm-hmm. We need an entity that is in charge of this, that appears trustworthy in every way, and they say, NIH, you do this, HHS does this. Instead, we were all over the place. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing.
And it has to be apolitical. I mean, it has to be like,
yeah.
Because I think that was one part of it that kind of muddied the waters as well, though. COVID became a very political pandemic.
It was a presidential election year, and that's what happened. And I said from the very beginning, and I said it under both administrations, America really needs to hear from the doctors treating COVID patients. Mm-hmm. That'll go a long way. And we can't sell things for more than what they are. So I think, imagine the difference, and I think America has time to reflect on this notion. Mm-hmm. What if in your local community, or from a national level, or places where the situation is the worst, like New York, what if you had a doctor walk out to a team of microphones, lower his mask and say, here's what I saw today. Here's who's dying. These are the comorbidities we're seeing people have that succumb to this virus. Here's a group that present, they have COVID, but they're barely ill. Right. We got to let people know.
But I think but to push back a little bit on that was happening on the local media level, national news. They were showing the sick patients, the doctors talking about, all the issues that were tied to, well, if you have diabetes, or high blood pressure, you have a bigger chance, or you have more concerns, or you have asthma. Those stories were being aired, broadcast, shared online. But I think looking at it now, I think the noise surrounding misinformation, disinformation, and all the chaos was a louder voice than the news that was actually getting out there, and the good work that good journalists were doing out there.
Yep.
I think the chaos and the noise on the other side or online, unfortunately, seemed to be louder than even what the government was sharing.
Yeah, so To your credit here at a local news station, yes, that was true. But what did the majority of the country see? They saw Dr. Fauci as the sole voice.
Right.
Right? Every day, governors, the president, press conferences. I said, if you're old enough to remember the Gulf War, America tuned in every night to hear General Schwarzkopf, who they knew and trusted, and he told you what was going on in the war. Right? That, I think, is the type of figure we need to lead a pandemic response in the future and have clearly defined roles within our agencies.
You mentioned taking it out of the White House, and I have to mention this just because it is part of the timeline in the history. So when the pandemic began, January 22nd, 2020, President Trump said, we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine. To your point, moving forward, there should be an immediate shutdown of people flying in from affected countries or what have you. There should be an immediate shutdown and then figure it out from there. But then his administration continued. Late January, those closures started to go into play. But when you talk about the messaging about General Schwarzkopf, you know, the messaging that kept coming from the top leader of our country was that it's going to go down close to zero. We're doing a pretty good job. We're almost done with this. That was only in February. And then it goes to, it's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle, it will disappear. And from our shores, you know, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows. And that's when, you know, 22,000 people a day are dying. And that number keeps progressively going up. So the messaging from the top, and President Trump has said, well, I didn't want to cause any chaos. That's why my messaging was always, hey, everything's going to be fine. We're working on it. Clearly, the messaging, to your point, needs to be out of the White House and more into a central agency that says, hey, we're taking care of this and we're doing
exactly.
it. Is that your view?
Because President Biden came out and said, if you get the vaccine, you won't go to the ICU and you won't die. That was false. People that got vaccinated were some going to the ICU and dying.
But fewer were.
Absolutely. But I said that from the beginning. Is, look, this is not the same as your polio vaccine, et cetera. This is new technology. It is different. And we know from the trials that people that get vaccinated can still get COVID. It's more of a therapeutic. It boosts your immune system. Right. It doesn't mean that
well, it's
that
the same
will
with
happen.
The flu.
That's where it is now. And now
you get the flu. You get the flu vaccine. Well, you can still get the flu. You're just
your
symptoms are less.
What do they call it? Flu shot.
Flu shot.
Now you hear the COVID shot. Okay, it's falling into that category.
So the verbiage was a concern.
Yeah, and I don't think it. You know, technically it is a vaccine, but the public's view of a vaccine is preventive, and this was not. We didn't explain that. Dr. Fauci said, if you get this vaccine, it's a dead end for the virus. No, it's not. These are the things that took away from trust. Yeah. And you can put blame in a lot of places. That's why I want this separate entity. Maybe that entity should include the Surgeon General. People don't even know who the Surgeon General is today. When I grew up, everyone knew who C. Everett Koop was. Yeah. He gave us our medical advice, right?
He had a lot of commercials about cigarettes.
I had a guy, a member of Congress, the other side of the aisle, and he says, hey, Wenstrup, you gonna be Surgeon General? Yeah. Surgeon General? And I said, well, if I was, you'd know who the Surgeon General is, wouldn't you? He goes, oh, that's cold. And I said, who's the Surgeon General? He goes, that's really cold. He didn't know. He didn't know. So, you know, we got to do a better to have a trustable entity in health across the board.
Does that take it out of the political realm where this became such a political hot potato? If you remove it from the White House, and while the president may give a briefing, my Surgeon General is telling me, or this XYZ agency you're mentioning, you know, possibly establishing and having be the main messenger. If they're quoting that agency and citing that agency, then you have the top dog reinforcing this particular agency.
It's still under the executive.
But to your point though, and from the past messaging, it can't just be somebody giving loose answers that really have no basis on the podium, whether they're Republican president or Democrat
Right.
president, they need to have those facts.
Right. And when I say out of the White House, I mean physically.
Right.
Physically out of the White
Right.
House. And, with people that basically are not known to have a obvious political bent, whatever, but have the scientific background, the knowledge, and the leadership skills to put together this team that'll have oversight over the agencies that we need and use to protect our health.
You make a lot of recommendations, but that's the problem with that is that they're recommendations.
I'm not kidding.
What is your certainty or hope that now that you're going to be out of office,
Yeah.
that these recommendations will be enacted? And we know how slow government is to react to things. How long would it take, do you think? Are we looking 10, 15, 20, even before another pandemic hits our country?
Yeah, people have a short memory, don't they?
They
And
do.
so they don't see the sense of urgency necessarily, but I think that we have to keep the pressure on. And, I still have friends in D.C. and, we still have a doctor's caucus that understand what we're talking about here and the
Yeah.
importance of it. And part of that too is maintaining a strong doctor-patient relationship or patient-doctor relationship, however you want to call it. Doctors weren't getting data. That's one of our failures. We weren't collecting data appropriately to give good advice to physicians so they could give good advice to their patients. And risk versus benefit of things, right? And so it gives us an opportunity to really do a lot of good. But it also, one of the things we have to address is our supply chain. Pandemic or not. We learned a lot during the pandemic, but pandemic or not, if you'd have told me when I was a surgeon in Iraq that my protective equipment and my pharmaceuticals rely on China, an adversary, how did our military let this happen? We can't have our berets made somewhere else or any part of our uniform made somewhere else. It's got to be U.S.
Yeah.
But our battlefield medicines, I have a bill out there to turn our battlefield medicines into 100% domestic, but we got to change some regulations. China dominates the active pharmaceutical ingredients. The things that go into medicines, we don't have. And we got rid of our generic manufacturers. The FDA is not over in China on a regular basis making sure that these drugs are fine. We had about 250 Americans killed about 20 years ago from tainted heparin that came from China. It wasn't quality and it killed people. Think about that as a form of sabotage. Or think about them saying, you're all cut off. You don't get the ingredients anymore.
Right.
Free world. You don't get the ingredients anymore for you to make generics.
And I think to the general public, the general public just assumes that, all right, the United States military, everything is either created, manufactured here in America, or to our partners in the UK manufacturers or what have you, other allied countries, Canada or what have you, make and help supplement products or whatever, but that's not the case.
We were doing things on trust, but without the verify.
Yeah. 12 years, social media was not what it was.
Right.
Obviously, when you began, it's in some cases devolved, other cases evolved. There's pros and cons.
Yeah.
There's pros and cons, I think, to it because there is a lot of positive, real information out there, but there are also people that are making their money off of creating conspiracy theories and keeping misinformation and disinformation out there, and they're,
And adversaries creating
and
it too.
adversaries as well, and
Trying to
casting
divide
effect.
us.
So, how do on the Hill? You're not going to be there anymore, and clearly you'll continue in some facet outside with other influences. But how do we as a country then? What did you see on the Hill? Those discussions to say, wow, it's not boots on the ground we have to worry about necessarily. It's ones and zeros in the digital realm on the internet that we have to now fight.
Well, I was asked that question similar one time when I was conducting a panel, part of a panel about freedom of speech, but misinformation, et cetera. I said, we really have to go back, in this case, what we used to talk about decades ago, which is buyer beware. Know who you're hearing from. We have commercials that joked about, well, I learned it on the internet, so it must be true. But too many people believe all these things.
They read 180 characters and they take it as gospel.
I had someone text me about something and said, oh, this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's not exactly true. I helped write the bill. Here's what it actually does. And I get this response, well, I'll check my sources. And I said, why am I not your source?
Right. You wrote the bill.
I helped write the bill.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I said, why are you not trusting me? You know, and anyway, and it's a supporter. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I'll check my sources.
And we face that as well. We face that as well.
Yeah.
I reply to people, and some people reply back and say, "Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad I have this information now. I can tell my friends, you know, what have you." But I do get some people that I know who I've reached out and said, "No, none of that is true at all. It's something they posted to Facebook," and they're like, "Well, I have my sources."
Yeah.
But that's a problem for members of Congress that you have to. That's another battle that you have to face.
Yeah, because they read something somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, we've done our best, I think, every time. Yeah, you know, major votes, how I voted, why I voted the way I did. You know, I mean, I had one leader in one of my counties, you know, said, "Yeah, you know, we'd see a vote and go, why did he vote that way? When we call your office, we got the answer and we were fine." I said, yeah, well, we always tried to put it out too.
Right.
You know, we do a weekly
Transparency.
Yeah.
That's what the American public, I think, is asking about a lot
Mm-hmm.
more now too. Is that transparency? Looking back then at your 12 years, as you say goodbye to the pen,
Mm-hmm.
how do you sum it up? How do you sum up your 12 years and what you're leaving behind? What do you want people to think your legacy is about?
I sum it up as a unbelievable honor. And I'm so grateful that I've had this opportunity. We put out today my final speech on the floor. I said, you know, I knew at a young age I wanted to be a doctor. I didn't know it would lead to a military career and a legislative career. I said, I guess that's my version of the American dream. And you know, and in this country, you can do that. No one in my family was in the military. No one in my family was in politics. You know, but I just thought, why not me? And so I think it's been an unbelievable opportunity. And as much as anything else, behind the scenes, never on the news, is how many people you were able to help. And those are the notes I'm getting today.